Welcome to the Unfazed, Unedited podcast, where we provide commentary on complicated topics in an uncomplicated format. I'm Dr. Shaunna Payne Gold, and I go by she, her, hers pronouns. And I'm here with Dr. Lisa for the very first episode of September. I cannot believe that
Yep.
we're starting to see the pumpkin spice folks come out,
I
all
know.
kinds of stuff, right?
No, I do not like pumpkin spice
Me
anything.
either.
So I'm one of those people that is like a naysayer because I know people absolutely adore it. But I saw that in Starbucks when I was walking past in a
Yes.
Target. They had the little pumpkin spice latte sign
Yes.
out. And I was
Yes.
like, no, how is it possible that that is coming out? And there's Halloween stuff in the stores and everything. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah, it's happening already. So it's like, oh my gosh. So uh folks that are working with others in business or their own business owners, entrepreneurs, and we're like creeping into third quarter ish, but capitalism and all the other things, they just basically position things even earlier. And so yes, time is fleeting, but we're kind of rushing it along at the same time too. So anyway, Lisa, I was in the grocery store just this morning and walked past the pumpkin spice Cheerios, and I was like, "That's it. That's it. I give up. I give up.
That actually sounds disgusting.
I can't do it. I can't do
No,
it. Lisa. I
no,
can't do it."
right.
So anyway, we're sliding on into either fake fall or kind of sort of real fall. I don't know what we're in right now. Just spent the semi last day of unofficial summer at the pool and trying to figure out what season it is. So here we are. But good to be with y'all once again. We have lots of great topics for you today, but we're going to start out with the word of the week, which is intergenerational. Lots going on there. Intergenerational. And this means anything that's relating to or involving several generations of people. And so you might hear this word kind of floating around, whether it's an intergenerational workplace, meaning all the folks of every age group from every labeled social age group in a workplace, for example. Or it can be a house of worship, or it could really be any setting that is intergenerational. And I think what's really interesting about intergenerational places, spaces, experiences is that just like every other identity group, trying to find the equity across those generations can be tough. Lisa, I am firmly in Generation X. And so things get interesting with my group in regards to now across industries being the largest group, yet not necessarily being the ones that are at the top of the org chart in an organization, despite having seniority and tenure in years, right? And so it's just the most interesting thing. So I just continue to try to overlay the intergenerational lens across most of the work that I do because I know there's something always there.
Yeah, Generation X's, me too, got left behind or skipped over. Well, aren't we
Right.
also known as like the quote unquote forgotten generation or something? When that
Yes.
I think is also manifesting in the workplace, like you say. Um, but I do think it's interesting, right? Because we think about workplaces with folks from different age groups, different generations, and the ways in which some have credibility and others do not. And then I think we can also break that down by gender. And so older women versus older men, for example, and who is considered wise versus washed up and over the hill, right? So it also, the term intergenerational makes me think about intergenerational trauma and the ways in which trauma is passed down through generations, right? That's another way that intergenerational has been used, that I also think is important, but not the focus for today, but something to
Yeah.
flag and think about.
Well, wait a minute now, though, Lisa. I think it is applicable to what we're bringing up today. As y'all can see, we don't script all of this, but for some reason, it always seems to work out. But even as we think about intergenerational trauma, I think it may connect with our phase one for today, because one of the articles that I've seen pop up, and then I've seen some other ones, whether it's based on a celebrity or even just in general, conversations about family estrangement. Family estrangement. So being separated or in some way keeping one's distance from family members. And I find this really interesting because I don't know if I'm from a small family or not, if you will, right? Because I'm an only child, my mother is an only child. My grandmother was the oldest of 17, which means we have no siblings, and I have no direct aunts and uncles on that side, but I have tons of cousins, second cousins. The tree just kind of spreads out a little further. And I try to understand these experiences of family estrangement, but, and not to say that everything is perfect in my family either, but I try to put my feet in other shoes in regards to understanding their experience of all the reasons why one would not want to be connected to their family members anymore. And it might connect back to that trauma that you're bringing up here, trauma from various experiences, whether it is some type of sexual or physical assault, or whether it's been bullying, the way that we now define it versus the way that people experience it. All these different things, I think, are applicable to reasons why people would not want to spend time with their family members. I mean, have you been hearing of this family estrangement piece that's now kind of exploding? I don't know if it's more of it happening, but I know we're aware of it more. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, it's interesting. I don't know that I have paid attention to or noticed a greater focus, but I will say that I do notice or understand family estrangement to be stigmatized. So I have definitely experienced people who don't understand how it isn't possible to be close to your blood family, and that are willing to put up with all manner of bad behavior on the light end to abuse on the severe end from uncles, cousins, brothers, mothers, whatever, because they're your blood relatives. So, quote unquote, blood is thicker than water, I think the phrase is. And I've never agreed with that. I'm like, if you don't like this person and you think this person is an ass or they've been shitty to you, then you don't need them to be in your life just because they are related to you, blood related, right? So, but I think that's a stigmatized position to take, because definitely then there becomes this pressure of like, well, you really should have these people in your life. They're your family, right? So I've heard things like chosen family, and that's definitely a big deal within the LGBTIQA community, at least in my limited understanding, because so many families, blood families, are terrible and kick young people out for being gay, right? And so then they build their own family, and those families are not blood related, but that is who their family is. So I hear that more about recognition and things like Thanksgiving, Friendsgiving, right? Like I'm going to have Thanksgiving with my people who I consider my family, who aren't my mom, dad, uncle, aunt, cousin, whatever. So that's interesting now that you're raising this, because I think I've heard more around chosen family than I have around it being okay to be estranged from your family, almost like
Right.
that part of the equation is left out.
Right, right, right.
Hmm.
Well, and what I think is really important too, going back to what you just mentioned around, I've never believed in this either. Like I don't believe in the guilting or shaming someone because they're willing to create healthy boundaries and stand up for themselves when people who happen to be related by blood treat them like crap. So I've never been a fan of that either, in regards to, oh, but they're your family. Oh, but they're your cousin. Oh, but they're your, I don't give a shit about any of that when it comes to the treatment of an individual. And at the very same time, what I think is really interesting is how many folks are now saying they are going to break up that double entendre piece that you're kind of hinting to here, which is not only has my family been shitty to me, that's one problem in and of itself. And then the problem of caring about the rest of the world and what they think in regards to protecting myself from shitty family members. So it's like, we talked about this, I believe, last episode around avoiding re-traumatizing ourselves, right? So, folks that I get it, people that may have cut off their families and they chose not to share that they are estranged with their family members because they didn't want the questions and the curiosities and the,
Right.
why don't we mend things and the healing process and so forth. They did not want to re-traumatize themselves by sharing that information. So, I'm just so fascinated by it because I'm a big fan of protecting oneself. And I think if we think about all the different identities on the identity wheel, in addition to the one that you just mentioned about LGBTQIA communities being estranged and sharing that more readily, even thinking about other identity groups, like how many people, and maybe I'm one of the few, but I'm sure there's a category of people like me who have always been working on their weight and always working on body image and all those things until much later on in life, like, 30s, before I just flat out said, nope, I love myself the way I am. That's it. I'm not going to re-traumatize myself. I'm not going to allow anyone else to traumatize me. Who wants to go to the family holiday where literally all you're doing is sitting around talking and eating? And as you're eating, because that's what living things do of all types, people are saying, oh, well, when are you going to start working on dropping those pounds? Or, oh, well,
right.
you look like you picked up a little bit of weight. Like, as the whole purpose of the holiday is to spend time over one's, whether it's cultural dishes or what have you. And so some people have decided, I'm not participating in that. Now, fortunately, my family has gotten through and beyond that, and that's, directed towards anyone in the family, not just me. And at the same time, I could understand if someone of another generation decided earlier than I did, instead of 30 something, maybe teen something, I'm not going home I'm not going home for Thanksgiving from college. I'm going to stay for my Friendsgiving on campus because I don't want to deal with the bullshit of people talking about what I look like and my size, as we're literally here for the purpose of sharing a meal with loved ones.
Yeah.
I can understand it and I think we could apply it to so many different identity groups that are already marginalized in the broader society. And then when you come back to people who, like you said, blood is supposedly thicker than water, you come home to the people that are supposed to care for you and about you, and you experience some of the same things, if not worse, from family than from society. I think I get it partially. I can't say fully for people that have truly been victimized in many ways, but I see how it could apply.
Yeah, and I don't know that it has to be some really terrible thing that's happened either. I think it's realistic to believe, you don't choose your family. You could just not like some people in your family because they're just not your type, right? I mean, certainly in this politically polarized place, I mean, people have come to blows in really big ways around political ideology. And that isn't because there's abuse happening in that family. It's just because I think you're a horrible human being, right? And I think that's okay. And I don't understand why it's wrong to say this family member, I don't really like them. Like, I don't understand why that's such a faux pas, right? Like, why is that problematic? Like, in the same way that I wouldn't make friends with someone who I think is kind of a jerk or narcissistic or whatever, right? Like, why should I then keep that individual in my life because I'm related to them? Like, I've never really understood that logic. And then when you were talking, Shaunna, I was thinking about movie representations, or particularly around the holidays, and particularly with people who are estranged from their family or maybe have lost people through death. They're always depicted as lonely, and they're always depicted as kind of like not lusting, that's not the right word, but like desiring of a family holiday. Like that's considered like the pinnacle thing oftentimes in movies. You rarely see individuals who are no longer in contact with family members happy and thriving and doing well, and that being a completely acceptable and desirable position to be in. Like when you think about holiday movies, right? I'm having trouble bringing one to mind where an individual is depicted positively, not lonely, not sad, right? When they don't have family around them at the holidays.
Right, right, right. And I have to say, to be honest with you, I have gotten to a, I think, healthier place for myself personally, where you're exactly right. Even for maybe some of the family members that know I may not hang out with them if I have a choice. And then growing up and coming fully into my being, saying, I always have a choice. Like that's one of my personal tenets in life, is that I always have a choice whether I'm going to be in person A's presence or not. And some people, granted, may not have the same perception that I do or we do, in that it's not okay to be alone in the holidays, or it's not okay for me to be what have you. I have had some of my most lovely, peaceful moments on holidays where I was chilling, doing what I want to do. I don't have to have a damn argument around what I want to eat and when somebody else wants to eat. It has been peaceful. Turn on Netflix, eat my food in my house. As my parents always say, I'm luxuriating in my black house with my black toilet paper and my clean house in the peace. Like when we stigmatize that too, Lisa, we stigmatize on both ends of how dare you be estranged, and also how dare you be at peace on your own.
Yes, 100%. 100%. Yeah. That's a
Yeah.
great that's a great way to end this phase, I think, right? Like you're
Yes.
luxuriating. I love it.
Yeah. My parents say
I'm
luxuriate.
totally gonna use that. Yeah, luxuriating. What a great word. It like kind of just sounds great even when you
It
say it.
does. It does. It does.
Okay, so let's shift into phase two because this is about the right to disconnect, but not from
Ooh,
your family. The right to disconnect about something
right.
else. So fill us in here, Shauna. What is this about?
Look, I got tickled because once again, we're seeing another country uh, create a law that hopefully would give workers the right to disconnect after business hours. Now, what I thought was really interesting, because you know me, Lisa, I'm going to give any type of law or policy like this the side eye. Like, okay, where's the loophole? What's wrong with it? Forgive me for my critical American training to look for what's wrong with something. But when I dug into the law a little more deeply, the law itself doesn't strictly prohibit employers from calling or messaging people after hours, but it supposedly, big underline blinking lights around supposedly, it supposedly protects employees who refuse to monitor, read, or respond to contact or an attempted contact outside of their working hours. And then it gives kind of a, how can I say, kind of an asterisk that says, unless their refusal is quote unquote unreasonable. I'm like, excuse me? So as I read it, it still feels like someone wrote the law in a vacuum that did not want to acknowledge the power dynamic, the power differential between a supervisor and their direct report, and how the direct report, especially after, decades of not having this in place, they may still feel that the onus is there. Oh, I need to respond, or there's going to be some negative perception of me, my work ethic, any of that. And so this law passed in February. It went live it went live Monday. But what I think is really interesting is that, okay, August 2025 is when this is going to actually apply to small businesses. Again, another power differential. And so I'm just concerned because I'm not quite sure how it's going to play out. And the very same people that have less power to say no, or to deflect, or to not respond, also don't have the power, the resources, et cetera, to take someone to court or to attempt to enforce the law as written. So for me, I'm like, nice try, Australia. I really love the spirit behind it, but I see like holes like Swiss cheese, Lisa. There's a lot of holes in this law.
Yeah.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure about this.
So Australia isn't the only country to do something like this. And as you were talking, I was thinking to
Yeah.
myself, there's no way the United States would ever pass anything like this with its kind of obsessive work culture that it has here.
Yes. Yes.
Um, but I do think you're right. The sentiment, or kind of the driving philosophy behind it, is to protect workers' free time, right? So that they're not always on the clock, and you and I have worked in student affairs in higher education, and that's certainly an example of a profession where emails are flying at all times of day and night, and there's this
Yes.
kind of tacit expectation that you're responding. So how it will ultimately help people who are in those kinds of professions. But I do see your point here about the Swiss cheese, because I'm just thinking about like the term reasonable. I mean, I don't know whether that's defined in the law or not. And then if it's not defined in the law, who gets to decide what is and is not reasonable? How might that be used as cover for some other discriminatory behavior, right? Like, well, Shaunna, you should have responded. It was unreasonable for you to respond. And that's how I get you, right, as your supervisor, versus, because I've got some other reason going on there. And then emergency. What's an emergency, right? Like,
Right. Right.
and how are you judging that? I mean, I remember like a friend of mine very early in my career used to tell her student workers, like, don't call me even if you think it's an emergency. It's only an emergency if you're trapped under something heavy and bleeding from the head, or something like that was what she used to say, because people's determination of an emergent situation is totally age dependent, experience dependent, context dependent, right? And then in many cases, supervisor
Yes.
dependent.
Yes.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Which is why I'm again, and let me just be clear for all of our folks that listen to us. This was not planned. Intergenerationally, what's a priority and an emergency for me may not be
Yeah.
for someone younger or someone older or just in a different generation period. And
Right.
so it is heavily dependent on your work experience and what you deem as, oh, this is literally a 5 alarm fire versus someone that says, little smoke. Like, really, it's going to be different. And so, to me, I just feel like it's way too much subjectivity to the law that
Yeah.
leans in the direction of the people that are already empowered to begin with.
Yeah.
Mm,
And that might be how they got it passed, right? I don't know Australia's climate, like,
yeah,
around these things, but it might be that's the negotiation that kind of weakened it in order to get something on the books, right? With the goal that
yeah,
maybe
yeah.
incrementally they can tighten it up and fill in those holes. So
Mm,
this. I mean, I don't know if that's true, but I could see this being an incremental goal where Australia is,
yes,
or certain legislators in Australia are trying to get to a more protective status for employees,
yes,
but
yes.
they couldn't go from A to Z, so they're going from like A to D, and then they'll go from like D to G, right? Like they're trying to do it incrementally. That could also be what's going on here.
That could be it. Yeah, that could be it. So, yeah, I read it and I was very
Mm-hmm.
concerned. And let's be clear, we as we as US citizens that are workers here have no room to talk about anyone's attempt to try to give people some work-life harmony. But yeah, as someone who's trying to see the ideal, this ain't it. This is not this is not it. And
Yeah, yeah,
going back to Lisa, uh our future hoodie and all the paraphernalia that comes with it, this is another poster child of exploitation, right? It's trying to interrupt the
it
exploitation,
is. Yeah,
but is it bolstering it further because we still have this question of who determines an emergency, and if you disagree with it, do you have a right to fight it, and how so? I think
yeah.
those are major challenges with this.
And I want to underscore the point you made about financial resources too, right? Because this is often
Yes.
true with any kind of law like this that give people an avenue to challenge. something, which presumably this is challengeable, right? If an employee feels like they're being mistreated and the employer is violating this law, they can challenge it. But who has the funding to do that?
Yeah.
Right? Like,
Or the
it's,
time.
I mean, yeah, right? So it becomes, so where's the teeth for an employer to, even modestly abide by this, if they know that their employees are in absolutely zero position to hold them accountable legally, right?
Exactly.
You know,
No way to
and
do it.
yeah, because in a civil process, you have to pay for your own lawyer, right? It's not the state
That's
or
right.
the province or whatever it is in Australia, like saying, we are going to sue you, company, for a violation of this law, right? It's probably going to be an individual action, which people aren't going to be able to do. I mean, not many people are going to be able to do, I would think.
Exactly. The only thing that I can think of that might be a resource is for the few that are unionized. And this law was specifically speaking to, or part of it was specifically speaking to very small businesses, which I doubt very seriously, obviously, would have a union. So, given that,
True.
I'm just like, this is going to be interesting. I have very little faith, but I'm going to continue to watch this trend because I do think it's important to pay attention to how workers or workforces are saying there must be a breaking point.
Right.
There's got to be a breaking point, and so what is it? What does it look like? And how do we define it? So that's the rub there. But anyway, Lisa, we'll never have that here.
No, I really don't. I mean, I cannot imagine any world where even something further watered down than the one in Australia would get passed here. I
Not
mean,
even close. Right.
I just can't imagine it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I mean, there's so many
Agree.
things that could be done to improve the mental health and physical health of workers in this country.
That's right.
But,
Right.
any attempt to do that, and I can already hear the communist, socialist moniker flags being waved from the opposition, right? Like, these poor business owners having to treat their employees with respect and give them time off, paid time off.
Yeah.
Goodness.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Anyway.
Exactly. And some of those small business owners left for the exact same reasons. That's why I love, what one of my former students says. I love what she says, because she, went into entrepreneurship herself, and she was like, I refuse to become my own toxic boss that I left. I'm not going to do that. And so, we just don't want to create the systems that already were problematic. Just
Right.
just know we have
Yeah.
to interrupt ourselves at some point. So
We do. You're right, because it's
yeah.
very easy to reproduce, isn't it? What you know,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yep.
All right.
So
Well,
anyway,
let's transition into phase 3, which is a little bit of a hard right because it isn't super connected to what we've been talking about, but I'm sure maybe we'll find a way. But as you well know, we had mentioned that the Paralympics were starting on August 28th, and we were curious as to the coverage and the exposure that the Paralympics would have vis-a-vis the Olympics. And it's less, right? So it's not on NBC a whole lot. They do have a primetime coverage show, but if you want to really watch all of the competition, you have to do it via Peacock. So you have to subscribe to Peacock and then watch the Paralympics, and you can get everything on there, right? So I've been watching the swimming, and it has been so cool. Like, I love watching swimming. And you know what's really struck me about the Paralympics versus the Olympics is there's usually in the swims, there's usually one person who is like clearly ahead of the rest. And then the silver and bronze race is coming down to like 4/10 of a second or something, right? And it's just, and so there's this real, like, there's usually like one person who's clearly the leader, and then you have this cluster of people like second, third, and fourth, and it's always really nail bitey to get down to that. And that feels different to me than some of the races, particularly the sprint races in the Olympics, where you tend to have like 5 or 6 people who are all really close for that gold medal. So that's been really cool, but you have to go looking for it, right? I've had to go on to Peacock and find the swimming. The The other thing, and what I wanted to talk about with you, Shaunna, is there has been one of the American swimmers, Christie Raleigh Crossley. She swims in the S9 and S10, which, let me see my notes here, is for swimmers with weakness, loss of coordination, and other issues. She did a really good job winning the silver in the 50 meters freestyle, right? So, actually, this is a sidebar. The USA is barely represented in the swimming, that like as compared to the Olympics, right? So like there are tons of other countries, the United Kingdom being one of them, Ireland, Poland, Ukraine, Japan, Malaysia, Singapore, like all these other countries that where they're winning medals that you don't see in the Olympics. So then that, and the US is just not featured. Like there are final after final where there is not a US person in the final. Wow. And so then this is probably a conversation for another time, but why is that? Are we not investing as a country into the Paralympics in the same way that we do with Olympics? Anyway. So Christie Raleigh Crossley, she won silver, and then there apparently was a slew of critiques on social media because of her speed, both in the preliminary heats and in the final, that where people were saying you shouldn't be an S9 or S10, you should be in a higher category. So the way it works is the lower the number, the more severe the impediment, right? And so the argument being is that she's too fast to be in an S9 or an S10 category without fully understanding the degree to which she experiences an impediment, right? So she's hearing this from other Paralympians as well as, you know, armchair commentators who don't know shit about shit.
Exactly.
Right? And so she actually reported it to the USA Swimming because it's been experienced as bullying and abuse online. And so it just made me feel I have a quote from her here. She says, "To be told online by all these bullies that I'm somehow not as disabled as I appear just because I can swim faster than them, it's pretty devastating," she said. "I'll shave my head tomorrow and you can see the scar and the dent if you want," referencing the accident that she had. So gross, right?
Exactly. Yeah.
But then it made me think about this whole I'm not blank enough, right? So she's receiving this critique that she is not disabled enough,
right,
or impaired enough to be in the S9 or the S10 category. Therefore, she is cheating, or it's not fair that she should be in those categories, right? So this kind of whole like cloak of fairness around critiquing her impairment, which just feels really horrible and kind of. But we hear this a lot, right, Shaunna? We hear, you are not woman enough. You are not man enough. You are not black enough. You are not disabled enough in many other contexts. And so I was curious about your thoughts on that, about why we as a culture do that to people, right? Why do we create these standards, these bars, these imaginary bars that people have to cross to be quote unquote legitimate or credible?
Well, okay, so we just talked about a number of different things. So generations, we just talked about. You're not old enough to know this information or be this experienced, right? Or you are too old to do XYZ. Or as we have seen when it came to things that people don't understand in regards to race and ethnicity. Is Kamala Black enough? We've heard that more than once because she is of mixed race ancestry. The reason why some of these arguments come up, in my opinion, is going back to flat out, well, a number of levels, but flat out biodiversity on the first hand in regards to people wanting to under analyze and underthink about the complexity of the lived experience. It is easier for me to say, okay, well, Kamala, she doesn't really look like the stereotype of a Black woman, so she's not Black enough, or Black person, so she's not Black enough. well, this trans person doesn't look like whatever enough, so let's call them something other than how they identify. We do this with so many different identities because we don't want to invite the complexity of thinking about someone that does not fit into the simplified category. And so to escape that thought process, to escape the intellectual labor that it takes to think about someone who is multiracial or on the chart in regards to Paralympics. In order to escape that, we're just going to say, oh, doesn't look like anything's wrong with you. And we know that language is already bad enough, but I'm just thinking about the stereotypical person that doesn't know anything about ability. It doesn't look like anything's wrong with you. So, right? We've heard this about, for example, HIV status. Oh, well, you don't look sick. All of these different misunderstandings that to me equate to I am not willing to engage in the intellectual understanding of someone who does not fit what I think. So I even heard an online interview where I think it was on the Pivot where The Rock was being interviewed, and I can't remember how his complete genealogy goes, but I do know that his dad was African American and I believe Canadian, and his mother, I can't remember. So, but my point is, with his background in ethnicity, he talked about that entire conversation where when he played football, other players would ask him all the time, what are you? And he would give the rundown. And they're like, no, but really, what are you? And that what are you question was, I need you to pick one thing and stick with it as your identity, because that's all I'm willing to intellectually process. So pick your one thing. And unfortunately, I feel like that's what we do. If an individual, especially a Paralympian, does not fit whatever stereotype of someone who is not fully able-bodied, and forgive me if I'm tripping over my words here, if you don't fit the stereotype, then you're not in the right category. I'm like, excuse me? And going back to your great point, the person that's probably trying to make this judgment, or the think tanks that are trying to make this decision, probably know nothing about the rankings or the divisions of ability to make sure that it is fair and it is comparable, as if the Paralympic committee doesn't know what they're doing.
Right, exactly, because there are parameters and there are tests, I think, for weakness and stuff like that, which I don't know how I feel about that.
Right,
because I'm not educated on it enough to really comment. But it's not like she just was like, I want to be an S9 or I want to be an S10, right? Like there are these like requirements, and no, to your point, like every person that races in or is a Paralympian, they don't all have the exact same impairment. So there has to be a way to group people together to maintain fairness, but knowing that it's not going to be the same, right? Because that's just not possible, to your point. But what you're saying is, I either absorb from culture, or I'm thinking it's too complicated for me to think about this person having multiple identities, intersecting identities, and I believe that a person who is this should look like or behave like this, and if you don't do that, then there's something going on here. There's something nefarious. You're making it up, right? It's on me because I don't want to do the labor of that, is what you're saying. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And that's where, unfortunately, it becomes a defensive moment where the athlete or whomever has to make a very hard decision to either validate and defend themselves or leave a silence that fiction novelists fill up, in my opinion. Right. If I don't feel like, for coming from a Kamala position or coming from this particular Paralympian's position, they should not have to even spend the energy validating or documenting how they identify. Yet at the same time, if they don't, things can get worse, right? Mm-hmm. I mean, we saw that with Obama's election specifically, it's like, you weren't born here, da da da. He's like, yeah, right. Check my birth certificate. Just the mere re-traumatization of having to expend the energy on things that are created as diversions because people don't want to freaking think. No, I'm not interested in doing that. And so I know, from our perspective, Lisa, we've spent a good amount of time. I know this feels tangential, but connected to this. We've spent a good amount of time of not, how can I say, not defending a lot of things. And we also know what that gets us, right? So like all the people that go to bat to defend DEI work, especially in this wave of anti-DEI legislation, I give them kudos and major credit for doing that, because it takes so much energy to do it that you have to validate the existence of something and then also do that function, right? And I have to admit, I have not spent a lot of time on the front lines of defending DEI, because why? Not because I don't feel that it's important and valid and real as an identity, but because I'm too busy doing it and being it, right? And so I wonder, when it comes to these identities, whether it's, people questioning Kamala's race and questioning one's ability and ranking of ability, it frustrates me that they can't just focus on being a fantastic Paralympian, right? I mean, that's all stressful enough, being at that level of athleticism, that now you also have to defend your right to exist. I'm not interested in that.
It's another form of exclusion, right? It's just another way we try to exclude people. Like, so the disabled community is already excluded, right? Because our whole world is built for able-bodied people, not for disabled folks. And then, but so you're already experiencing that level of macro exclusion, and in many cases micro, but now like you're going to excel at swimming. But now we're going to try and push you out of that too because you're not disabled enough. Like, it's just absolutely asinine, right? When you think about it, like that you can't win rock in a hard place, right? I just want to comment for folks who are listening to this. If you hear the thumping, Shaunna's getting very animated, and so she's thumping on her desk as she's talking. So, because if you're not watching this, you won't understand that.
That's
but
exactly
that thumping was, she was getting very into her commentary.
It's so frustrating. It's so, yes, the sound effects that I'm giving y'all is very real, because it is very frustrating. It's expending energy that should not have to be expended when you're just trying to be excellent at what you are and who you are, what you do and who you are. And
right.
And I keep thinking for those folks, I'm thinking for our trans athletes and all sorts of other identities, that I'm thinking to myself, how much better could they perform and just be if they did not have to fight those identity wars?
Right.
Like the amount of energy that they would not have to expend in that area. I'm like, they are the real goats when it comes to all of that athleticism and the level that they compete at. It's very real, very real. So.
Yeah, so I think this is a bigger issue around the ways in which we create these measuring sticks. But we will drop the links to the articles that spurred us to talk about these issues today in the show notes, so you can go and rabbit hole them yourselves, because I'm sure that they will take you off in lots of different directions. But let's wrap it up for this week, Shaunna. So where can folks find us?
Yeah, so I'll stop banging on my desk, y'all, at this point. But just know that you can find us really everywhere. You can find us on YouTube at Unfazed, Unedited, with brackets around un. You can find us at Apple Podcast and Spotify. You can find us at Instagram, Unfazed Pod, LinkedIn, Unfazed Pod. Send us an email at info@unfazedpodcast.com. And of course, our website, unfazedpodcast.com, for both our old and our newest shows. So if you like this week's episode, if you're having intergenerational conversations, wherever you may find them, please share this episode, subscribe, leave a review, and of course, please share this with friends, coworkers, and others in this phase of your life. So until next week, Dr. Lisa.
Until next week.